Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. We're going to unpack how 1,500 years of incredibly complex Russian history reveals this relentless, repetitive cycle of total destruction followed by formidable rebirth. Now, why should you care? Well, because understanding this massive cycle is literally the key to understanding the largest country on Earth today. So, let's kick things off with a totally terrifying fact from 1983. Picture this. A single Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov is sitting alone in a bunker, right? Suddenly, his computer tells him 5 American nuclear missiles are inbound. Now, protocol dictated that he fire back immediately. But he chose not to press that button. Going purely on a gut hunch that it was just a glitch, he literally saved every human being alive on this planet from nuclear annihilation. Wild, right? But to really grasp the enormous historical weight resting on that one officer's shoulders, we gotta look backwards. To make sense of it all, we're breaking this massive history down into 6 defining eras. The birth of Kievan Rus, the Mongol trauma, building an empire, the fall of the Tsars, the rise of the Soviets, and finally, the modern Russian era. Let's jump right into part 1, the birth of Kievan Rus, from swamps to Tsars. We're rewinding 1,500 years. The local Slavic tribes were struggling so badly to govern their own bogs and forests that they actually did something completely bizarre. They basically invited the Vikings to come rule them. According to legend, a Viking warrior named Rurik took one look at this cold, chaotic swampland, simply said, yeah, all right, and took the job. And from those pretty humble beginnings, his family quickly built a massive trading kingdom known as Kievan Rus, stretching all the way from the Baltic down to the Black Sea. It is so fascinating how this early culture was cemented. Prince Vladimir realized his growing kingdom needed a modern, unified religion. So he literally took pitches. He flat out rejected Islam specifically because it banned alcohol, supposedly stating, Russia cannot live without drinking. So he went with Christianity instead. He changed the trajectory of the entire culture overnight, basically just because the boss said so. Which brings us to part 2, the Mongol trauma, 240 years of ash. But of course, stability rarely lasts, does it? When Vladimir's family eventually died out, the kingdom completely shattered into these squabbling little princes. And this was the absolute worst possible timing, because in 1237, the Mongols arrived. Now, the crucial thing to wrap your head around is the number 240. That is 240 years of brutal Mongol occupation. They burned the proud capital of Kiev to the ground so thoroughly that travelers literally saw nothing but empty fields and ash. For over 2 centuries, survival meant traveling east just to beg the Mongol Khan for the right to rule your own town. Yet amidst all this trauma, one small, honestly pretty boring northern town called Moscow slowly started gaining power. How? Well, they volunteered to collect the Mongols' gold from all the other Russian princes. And every single time they collected, they secretly skimmed just a little bit off the top. Year after year, Moscow grew quietly and dangerously rich. Eventually, they used that wealth to fund their own independence without even fighting a single final battle as the Mongol Empire started to fracture. Moving right along to part 3, building an empire, Ivan, Peter, and Catherine. Having outlasted the Mongols, Moscow's rulers decided the title prince just wasn't cutting it anymore. So they upgraded to Tsar, which is basically the Russian version of Caesar. The rise of this volatile new empire was, in a word, chaotic. I mean, you start with Ivan the Terrible, who aggressively expanded borders but also tragically murdered his own son in a furious tantrum. His death then kicked off 15 years of absolute madness. It only ended when exhausted nobles finally placed the Romanov dynasty on the throne in 1613, basically just to force some kind of stability. But by the late 1600s, Russia was stuck centuries behind a rapidly modernizing Europe. To catch up, you get Peter the Great, this literal 6'8" giant of a man who forced aggressive modernization. He actually toured Europe in disguise, came back home and implemented a literal beard tax. He forced his nobles to shave and start wearing European jackets. He even shifted the entire national calendar backwards by over 5,000 years before breakfast, just to align with Europe. He basically dragged his country kicking and screaming right into the modern world. Later on, Catherine the Great would expand those borders massively, but there is a fundamental truth about this empire you have to understand. Russia's greatest weapon was always its geography, and specifically, its winter. When Napoleon invaded in 1812, he brought 600,000 soldiers. What did the Russians do? They literally burned their own capital of Moscow and retreated. Out of that massive army, only about 30,000 of Napoleon's men limped out alive, completely destroyed by the freezing cold. Now we hit part 4. The fall of the Tsars, Rasputin, and revolution. Beating Napoleon was a huge flex, sure, but it didn't change the fact that everyday Russian serfs were living in an absolute medieval nightmare. That internal pressure finally boiled over under a notoriously weak ruler, Nicholas II. He made the catastrophic decision to enter World War I with a military that was just horrifyingly unprepared. I'm talking soldiers being told to pick up the weapons of their dead comrades, literally marched into the freezing winter without boots. Entire armies were surrounded, resulting in an unprecedented, truly devastating 2 million Russian soldiers dead. While the front lines totally collapsed, the royal family just isolated themselves. They started relying heavily on this incredibly bizarre, deeply unpopular peasant monk named Rasputin. The nobles despised him so much that they finally plotted his murder, and the details of this are just staggering. They fed him enough cyanide to kill 5 men. Then they shot him. Then they watched him get back up, shot him 3 more times, and finally chucked him into a freezing river. When they found him, his hands were clawed, meaning he had actually tried to swim out from under the ice. It just perfectly encapsulates the total chaotic collapse of the royal circle. Which leads us straight into part 5, the rise of the Soviets, the Red Century. By 1917, the exhausted workers had officially had enough. Nicholas quietly signed away 300 years of Romanov rule on a train carriage, and just like that, the era of the Tsars was completely over. So how did the communists actually take over the ashes? Honestly, it comes down to a masterclass in sales pitching. After being sneaked back into Russia on a sealed train by Germany, Vladimir Lenin led the Bolsheviks to power using 3 incredibly simple words: peace, land, and bread. To a starving, freezing country, that promise was completely irresistible. The Soviet era quickly turned brutally dark, though. After Lenin, Joseph Stalin ruthlessly consolidated absolute power. We're talking labor camps, starving millions, and launching deadly political purges. But when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history against them, the Soviet response was absolutely staggering. They pushed the German army back all the way to Berlin, but it came at an unfathomable cost: 27 million. That is 27 million Soviet lives sacrificed just to crush the German army. Emerging from the rubble of World War II, Stalin's country wasn't just surviving anymore, it was a bona fide superpower holding the atomic bomb. For the next 45 years, the USSR and America engaged in this incredibly tense global standoff we know as the Cold War. The entire planet was essentially split in 2, just staring at each other across the world with thousands of nuclear weapons on a hair trigger. And that brings us right back to that officer in the bunker in 1983. Finally, we arrive at part 6, the modern Russian era: collapse and return. Now, while the Soviet military looked totally terrifying from the outside, the internal economy was just quietly rotting away. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev stepped up and tried to introduce some openness and economic reform to save the whole system. But in a massive twist of irony, it accidentally caused the entire Soviet bloc to shatter completely apart almost overnight. There was no grand final battle. Instead, on Christmas Day in 1991, the Soviet flag was quietly lowered from the Kremlin, instantly transitioning the country into a very chaotic new era. Following this severe economic chaos and, quite frankly, gangsterism of the 1990s, a former KGB agent named Vladimir Putin assumed the presidency in 1999. He didn't waste much time firmly locking down domestic institutions, the media, and his political rivals. Once that base was secure, he launched major military interventions, most notably the 2014 annexation of Crimea, and later the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Once again, the map of power had drastically shifted. And that brings us exactly to where we are today. When you consider that the entire foundational shape of this nation was forged by surviving the literal ashes of the Mongols, beating back Napoleon using the freezing winter, and sacrificing millions to stop Hitler, we really have to ask ourselves something. Does this relentless 1,500-year cycle of devastating collapse and iron-fisted autocratic resilience ever actually stop? Well, history hasn't given us an answer to that yet, but it's exactly the framework you need to keep in mind when you're looking at the world today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history behind the headlines.